the sun high in the sky. Who would hide from heaven's glory? Who would pass the challenge by? La 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 la.
There's a morning for every nation when the sun's high in the sky. There's a time for every people to affirm their destiny. La 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 la. Even so, all of us together can create a better land.
Leave the past and new tomorrow waits for all who understand. There's a morning for every nation when the sun's high in the sky. There's a time for every people to affirm their destiny. La 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 la. Even so, all of us together can create a better land. Leave the past and new tomorrow waits for all who understand. La 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 la. Leave the past and new tomorrow waits for all who understand.
This may seem like a slightly strange way to start a morning talking about deepening our spiritual path, deepening our spiritual evolution. But in fact, we have a great misconception, not we, many people have a great misconception about spirituality, that our spiritual life lives somewhere over there. It lives in a puja room, it lives in a temple, it lives somewhere that we visit once in a while. Perhaps we visit it even every morning. But then we leave that and we come out and we start our regular life. But that's a very wrong conception about what spirituality is. And if we hold that conception, we're going to not only not make very fast spiritual progress, but we will actually split our spiritual, we'll become split personalities, and we won't be able to feel the wholeness. Yoga means unity, and so it means not only unity of the soul with God or with the Creator, but it also means to unify those various aspects of our own self. And one of those aspects is our physical body and our energy. And therefore, Yogananda, our guru, not only he started out when he was just barely 20 years old. He started a school which now resides in Ranchi. And it did at that time too, but it took a couple of steps to get there. But there with his boys, he taught something that he said was his unique contribution to the science of yoga, and it was the energization exercises, for those of you who know those. Next year is the 100th anniversary of when Yogananda introduced those energization exercises. Now, we have been teaching these for a very long time, for nearly 50 years, and practicing them. But many, many people end up not doing the energization exercises because they kind of, both in their habit patterns, but more importantly, mentally, they dismiss them as, oh, that's just physical something. But what Yogananda was showing us is that the physical body and the mind are one unit. Now medical science calls it the body-mind connection, and it's very common that this is understood now 100 years later. But when Yogananda was beginning to teach, the body-mind connection was not understood. But there was something more that he was giving us than just the mind and the body. He was showing us that our energy level, our thoughts, our mood, and most importantly, our connection with God depends largely on the energy level that we have. See, we live in an infinite sea of energy. There's prana all around us. How much prana? I read something recently that there's a theory called the zero-point energy theory, which looks at basically how much energy there is that we don't perceive, and how much energy resides in the universe that we think of as being a vacuum. And through calculations, with rigorous mathematical calculations, the calculation is that the prana contained in what we think of as a void or as a vacuum, the prana contained in a cup of that vacuum is sufficient to boil away all of the oceans on the earth. Now that's a kind of a mind-boggling thought, that we live in this sea of energy, and yet we, by and large, are unable to tap that energy in a conscious way. Yogananda would sometimes say, you think you're tired, you think you don't have any energy. In a single pinch of flesh, there's sufficient energy to run the city of Chicago for an entire week, and yet you think you're tired. So, starting with these, we call them superconscious living exercises. See, we have a subconscious mind, a conscious mind, and a superconscious mind. The subconscious mind is basically the reservoir of all of the things that have happened to us, the things that we have seen, the actions that we've done, the emotions that we've felt, even things that don't register on the conscious mind, because there's a great deal that doesn't register on the conscious mind. But all of that resides in the subconscious mind. I read a very interesting experiment that was done, thinking of things that happen, but we don't register them consciously. In this, there was an experiment, and the people that were the subjects of the experiment were told that their job was to count how many times two players threw a ball back and forth. So they had to count 1, 2, 3, 4, and so they were focused on that. And then, after that experiment was done, then the experimenter said, well, how many times? And most everyone was able to tell the number of passes back and forth, 30 passes or whatever it was. Then the experimenter said, how many of you noticed the gorilla? I said, what? They had a man walk right behind these two players in a gorilla suit. And only about 1 in 10 noticed the gorilla that walked right past them. Well, there are gorillas all around us that we don't recognize, that we don't think of consciously. And so the subconscious mind registers all of those things. Yoganandaji said that when we die, we will have a kind of a life review, and our entire life will flash in front of us. And he said at that time, from the subconscious mind, we will remember everything that happened to us in our entire lifetime. Nothing will be, there won't be any unnoticed gorillas. at that time. Everything will be there. And so the subconscious mind takes all of that in, and it more or less forms a kind of a repository of experiences and thoughts. And that repository, to a very large extent, is what determines how we act, how we behave, what we feel. So the subconscious habit patterns, and it's not just this lifetime, but it's from many, many past lifetimes that we carry those subconscious patterns with us. And so sometimes you'll come into a room, you'll see a stranger that you've never seen before, and you'll have an immediate sense of connection with that person. Haven't you all had that experience? Master said that that's because in a past life you were close to that person. Sometimes you will have an immediate dislike for a person, and that's because in a past life you've had some difficulty, some conflict with that person. Well, all of that resides in the subconscious mind, but from past lives it isn't just the current subconscious mind. In our deep spine, our astral spine, there are seeds of memory. In fact, everything, I was saying that Master said that you remember in your subconscious mind everything that you did in this life at the time of death. By the way, Swami Kriyananda called death the final exam. He said that all of our life, the way we live it, what we do, what we think, the attachments we accumulate, and so on, lead up to the moment of death, which is the final exam. And if at the time of the moment of death we are sufficiently non-attached, and if we have tied up all of the loose ends and neutralized the balance sheet, positive and negative, if all of that is done, when the life force, Yogananda explained, actually leaves the body by rising up the astral spine. Astral spine is central to our body, and the physical spine and spinal cord is the physical counterpart to that more essential astral spine. So the life force rises up because it's going to leave the body, and when the life force leaves the body becomes inert. But for almost everyone, the life force comes up and leaves the body at the medulla oblongata, which is, or area of the medulla oblongata. That represents the ego. And so if the life force leaves the body through the egoic center, it means we leave with egoic consciousness. The ego is the soul that's identified with the body and the personality. And so if we're still identified with the body and the personality, when we leave, our final exam is, how are you going to leave? How is the life force going to exit? And if it exits with the consciousness of ego, that means that we are still in ego consciousness, and therefore we will have to take another body in order to play out whatever desires or attachments or whatever it is that we still retain with us. Think of reincarnation in one sense being like an enormous amusement park. This earth is an amusement park. Yogananda said that it was created for our education and entertainment. But then he added, but how few are either educated or entertained by their life on earth. But so we're learning our lessons and we're being entertained. And so think of an amusement park where you have a golden ticket that allows you to go on any ride for as many times as you want. And you can go on the ride to great riches, and that takes you on a big almost like a virtual reality lifetime where you're seeking after riches and maybe you just about have it, but you don't. Then when the life force leaves the body, you say, oh, I want to go on that ride again. I want to be wealthy. I want to be not only wealthy, I want to be very, very wealthy. I want to be the richest person in the world. Well, that's going to take a lot of rides on that road to riches, entertainment. And along the way, we will find that it, in fact, is not so entertaining. That there's a lot of difficulty, there's a lot of heartbreak, there's a lot of disappointment, there's a lot of difficulty in attaining that. But the worst of it is that if we do finally, after many, many lifetimes, attain great wealth, perhaps become the richest person on the planet, the joke of it is that it doesn't give us what we want, which is to be happy. Rich people aren't any happier than you and I. Now, there's a difficulty of being too poor, but if you're comfortably off, relatively comfortable, as most people in this room are, getting more wealth won't make you a single bit happier than what you are now. So if you hold that delusion that I'll be happier if I have more money, you're going to have to keep riding that golden ticket that gives you the road to riches amusement ride until you finally get to the point where you say, I don't want to ride that one anymore. And gradually, as the soul goes through more and more and more experiences, it says, I don't want to ride that one anymore. I don't want to be famous. I was famous. It was no fun. I had no privacy whatsoever. I don't want to be rich. I don't want to be powerful. Gradually, Yogananda said that eventually these things take on for the soul an anguishing sense of monotony. I love that phrase, an anguishing sense of monotony. We do it over and over and over again, knowing that it isn't fulfilling for us. And so the soul learns by the entertainment and education of life after life until gradually it comes to the point where it says, I don't want anything. I know my happiness lies within myself. I know there's nothing outside of me that can make me happy because happiness is my own choice. And therefore, let me just reside within myself and be happy. That's really the start of the serious discipline of the spiritual path. Because at that point, we begin to ask the question, not just how can I be happy, but how can I be permanently happy? How can I not just be happy, but how can I be filled with bliss? And we look around and we ask, who can answer that question for me? Can Bill Gates answer that question for me? Can Bill Gates tell me how to be blissful? I don't know if he's the richest person in the world or not, but one of those people. Can he tell me? No. Can the most famous of the Bollywood actors or actresses, can they tell me how to be blissful? No. Who can? The great saints, because they have found what they're looking for within their own self. And so I want to talk about, because that is the spiritual quest. To find our own true self is the spiritual quest. And remember, I started out by saying it doesn't reside in the puja room. Well, it's in the puja room, but if we think that it's only there, and we're in the puja room for 15 minutes out of the day, then there are 23 hours and 45 minutes where we're not, where we think our spiritual life resides. And so we have to integrate everything together. But coming back to this theme, finally, when we get tired enough of seeking it in all the wrong places, we begin to seek it spiritually. Now, what does it mean to seek it spiritually? Because that's really the essence of what we're talking about. For one thing, God does not reside outside of ourselves. God is within. All of the great scriptures tell us this. So if we're looking for God outside, then we're not going to be able to find Him. Not that He isn't also outside, but He's within our own self, and that's where we as each individual will find Him. And so as that spiritual search begins, we begin to say, there's nothing outside that is going to fulfill me. Therefore, remember the final exam. How is the life force going to exit the body? When that moment of death comes and the life force goes up, at the ego, it doesn't stop there. It says, I know that I'm not going to find what I'm after with anything egoic. It exits the body through the spiritual eye. And in the spiritual eye is the interior world. That's why we call it the spiritual eye. In the Christian Bible says, if thy eye be single, thy body will be filled with light. Meaning the two physical eyes can't fill the body with light. The single eye, the spiritual eye, fills the body with light, fills the body with God's light. And so if our life force leaves the body and merges into that light that is at the spiritual eye, then light is universally everywhere. And we don't have to re-inhabit a body in order to find what we're after, because we have already merged with that. So let's define the quest, the spiritual quest, as the desire to merge with God, but perhaps God in one of His forms. In the scriptures of India, they say that God manifests primarily in 8 different ways. Now you take a sunlight coming through a window, and it looks just like white light. It's just light. But if you take a prism, you see that light is split up into the colors of the rainbow. And so the 7 colors of the rainbow are the different vibrations of sunlight. Well, the vibrations of God's light have different qualities to them. And so it's joy, it's peace, it's calmness, love, wisdom, light, sound, and power. Those are the 8, one could say, colors of God. And so what Yogananda said, he defined meditation as deep inward concentration on God or on one of His qualities. And so we can meditate on light. We can look into the spiritual eye, and because light is there. And if we can concentrate our minds sufficiently, calm them and focus them, then the light, which at first some people don't see at all, but most people see something. It looks a little bit like kind of shifting what you see in the Hubble telescope pictures of, the cosmos. It's kind of cloudy and amorphous, but shifting around a little bit. Gradually that becomes formed into a kind of a circle, a golden circle with a dark center. And some people describe that as a donut. Why do I see that donut in my forehead when I meditate, they'll ask. Because there's a golden ring and a deep blue circle. And then eventually there's a little point of light in the center. or that becomes a 5-pointed white star. And then that might seem to form into a kind of a tube or a tunnel. And in very deep meditation, see, meditation to a certain extent is like practicing for that final exam, because our life force becomes concentrated and it can actually go out through the spiritual eye, through that tunnel, and go out and merge with God in the form of light. Or we can listen to the sound of Om, or we can feel great, great expansive love, or joy, which is centered also here. Any of these various qualities. But why don't we simply feel and see these things all the time? One, because the senses make too much noise. Yogananda called one of his beautiful books, which are prayer demands, he called them whispers from eternity. And so if God is whispering to us through these various ways of manifesting, but we're in a room where there's all sorts of noise and horns blaring, and we're very interested. We've got a television set on here and a radio over there, and we're looking at our computer, and we've got our Apple iPhone going. Those whispers are going on, but we're not calm enough to pay any attention to them and to be able to hear them. And so meditation, in part, is simply to still ourselves sufficiently so that we can see what we already are. See those qualities, light and sound and joy and peace and calmness and love, all of those qualities are already in us right now, and they're there as powerfully and as fully as they will ever be. But we aren't paying attention to them. We're paying attention to the things that the senses, the two eyes won't fill the body with light. They'll fill it with pictures and ideas and trees and people and this person and that person and sky and clouds, and all of the things that we see will come in, and it will fill the mind and fill the brain. The brain will be very active, sensing and interpreting what's going on. All of that activity makes us mentally restless. And that mental restlessness makes it so that we cannot calm ourselves sufficiently to hear God's whispers, to see His inner light. So meditation, Yogananda defined simply as deep concentration on God or on one of these qualities. And as we concentrate on those qualities, let's say concentrate on light, since I've been using that as an image. So we concentrate on light, and at first it looks like we're looking at light perhaps in the forehead, but that light is separate from us. There's there's an I, and I am looking at that light. So there's a viewer, a perceiver, and the object of perception. But if we can hold our consciousness for a longer period of time, that sense that I'm separate from that light begins to diminish and finally disappears, so that we no longer feel that that light is separate from us, that we are that light. And then, if we can hold that for long enough, that light begins to expand, and we no longer feel that we are anything other than the light. And light is omnipresent. Light is everywhere. And so we merge with God in the form of light. I'm getting quite a bit of feedback. Are you hearing the feedback? Yeah, can we adjust it so that there's less of that? So So meditation is trying to merge with those qualities. And meditation should become the foundation of our spiritual life. So, because if we don't have, whether we call it meditation, whether we call it deep focus, but something needs to happen where we become sufficiently still and able to commune with God. Yeah, we'll pause. We're hoping that if I get back away from the speakers, we won't have the feedback going on. So, seems to have worked. So, meditation needs to form the basis of our spiritual life, because without it, the mind is too restless to perceive ourselves in a deeper way, perceive ourselves as a part of the wholeness of God. So, but for most of us, we'll pause a little bit. See, think of this as the entertainment part of the education and entertainment. I'm trying to educate, this is trying to entertain. Okay, now, how are we doing now? It seems pretty good. So, meditation needs to form the basis, because it's in deep meditation that we will finally perceive ourselves as unified with God, achieve the state of self-realization. Because in fact, to do that, remember I was talking about how at death, the life force leaves the body. To perceive ourselves as being unified with God, also the life force needs to leave the body, but it can happen in meditation while we're still in a living form. But so having the foundation of meditation is extremely important. But for most of us, meditation will only form an hour a day if you're pretty regular and pretty adept. Maybe it'll form 15 minutes a day. Maybe if you're really, really dedicated, it'll form 3 hours a day. But that still leaves 21 hours a day or 23 hours a day. It leaves basically the rest of our life. And so if we think meditation is like the puja room, the spiritual life resides there. Once I leave the puja room, I'm not spiritual anymore. We lose the integrity of who we are. And so we need to take the same kind of energy that we put in to trying to find unity with God in meditation. We need to apply that to our daily life also. We're a whole cloth, and so we can't just dip a corner of a cloth in water and think that it will saturate the whole of the cloth. We have to put the whole in the water. In fact, when I was just starting on the spiritual path, I had a beautiful and very significant dream. That God will come to us at times through dreams, because the mind is more open. If you've ever had a dream where the images and the message is very, very clear, you feel like you're in a heightened state, and very often you'll wake up right after the dream because some deep spiritual message, and you'll know that it's spiritual, and you'll remember it for years and years into the future. So when I was first starting on the spiritual path, I was with Swami Kriyananda, and he asked me to leave my job I was working as a social worker. He asked me to leave that job and become his assistant. And I knew that this was much more than just a change of job. This was a change where I would kind of leave outward worldly pursuits and integrate my life as with Swami and as a search for God. And so one night while I was pondering this, I had a dream where I was walking through a meadow and I was carrying a fishing pole. And I used to enjoy fishing when I was young. My father and I would go, and we would go to these streams and catch trout, and it was exciting and fun and a way to be with my father, and I enjoyed it. But as I grew older, I didn't like the fact that the hook hurt the fish. And so I was walking with this fishing pole, and I saw a cave with an underground stream in it. And so I knew that that was where I was supposed to fish. So I threw the line in and immediately tugged on it, and a fish came out. I hooked it, and I was very carefully trying to take that hook out of the lips of this fish. And as I looked at it a second time, it was not a fish, but it was the baby Jesus, because I was in a Christian country, was the baby Jesus that was in my lap. And he looked at me, and telepathically he said, "You will never know what it is like to be a fish by sitting on the bank." And turned back into a fish, flopped out, and swam away. And so I woke up immediately, and I knew, of course, the interpretation of the dream. If I wanted to live a life dedicated to the spiritual search, I was not going to, and as part of Swami Kriyananda's energy field, I was not going to do that by standing outside and evaluating what it would be like if I had done that. And so I took the job, and my life changed completely afterwards, and all for the better. But so we need to then begin to look at how to integrate the rest of the time, the other 23 or 24 hours that we have during the day, into our spiritual search. And it's not as if it's just for us who are, I don't know, think of us as just regular people with our families and our debts and our obligations and so on. It is the way of searching in this particular age that we're in. 100 or 1,000 years ago, if you wanted to carry on a spiritual search, the world was so kind of debased and hard that the way you did that was to leave and go to the Himalayas, or you went to an ashram. You became a monk or a nun, and you left the world and didn't have anything to do with it because it just was too downward pulling. And so that's a model that many people still have. But there's a beautiful teaching of our particular line of gurus. Lahiri Mahashaya was the first person to be given Kriya and then be given the charge to bring that teaching of Kriya Yoga, which is a particular technique of our path of meditation, to bring that out into the public. And so Babaji called him. If you've read the autobiography of a yogi, you know this story. And if you haven't, I won't tell the whole story. I just get to the nut of the lesson here. So Babaji in the Himalayas called Lahiri to him, and Lahiri went, and Babaji not only awakened him spiritually and then initiated him into Kriya Yoga, but Lahiri first didn't recognize anything, and Babaji tapped him on the forehead, and he remembered past lives sitting in that cave, away from, so here's the model. Go to the Himalayas, find a cave, sit there for years and years and years in deep meditation and contemplation, and you can achieve realization of God. And so Lahiri, after Babaji tapped him, he went into samadhi, high state of samadhi, for over a week. And when he came out of that state, he said, "Please, Babaji, may I stay with you now?" And Babaji said, "No, you may not. You have a family, you have children, you have a job, you have responsibilities, and there's a reason that I waited to call you to me until that was your life condition. You have to go back and take these teachings into the world, because with the change of ages, the time had come not to separate our search from God, for God, from the world, from our daily activity, but to integrate the two. So here's a great avatar. Babaji sends him back, and he is an accountant in the British military for the next 22 years. Now that doesn't sound exactly like the typical life of one of the greatest saints of modern times. But the reason for that is that Babaji was saying the time has come to integrate spirituality and daily life, and that you can both be highly spiritual and you can be carrying on your responsibility, your job, your family, and so on. In fact, it's even deeper than that. That Lahiri Mahashaya was already a liberated saint, completely liberated, before he took this incarnation. But before he took this incarnation, he looked at the plight of people like us. People who have families and children and responsibilities and worries and problems. And he said that these people too, are sincere in their yearning for God, in their yearning for enlightenment. And we must bring to them a technique, because they don't have hours and hours every day and years to sit in silent meditation. We have to bring to them a technique that is very efficient, very quick. And so he knew, of course, from ancient times, the practice of Kriya Yoga, which is central to a spiritual path. And so he wanted to bring Kriya Yoga and bring the teachings basically to householders. And so when Babaji told him to go back to Benares, Varanasi, and give people Kriya Yoga, but only those who were highly qualified, he said, "Please, sir, can't I give this sacred technique to those sincere men and women who are sincerely seeking God, but perhaps are not yet highly advanced and ready to leave the world?" And Babaji said, "It is God who has spoken through you." So this represents a change of ages, where we now have to integrate, as Lahiri Mahashaya did, integrate family and children and job and responsibilities and the need to earn an income, integrate all of that into our spiritual search. So now, when we talk about how to deepen your spiritual search, we can't talk only about how to deepen your meditation. Yes, of course that's important, but we have to also talk about how to integrate spirituality into daily life. And you and I know the difficulties that we have just dealing with daily life, just dealing with perhaps a work environment that is not supportive, or for younger people dealing with family that is not supportive and difficult, and all of the difficulties in life. Well, how do we bring a true spirituality into that also? Meditation requires withdrawal from the world because we need to concentrate our mind and interiorize it. But living a spiritual life requires living in the world but bringing God with us into the world. So how do we do that? There are several things that are very, very helpful. One is to feel that your mind always wants to turn back to God and God's presence. There's a beautiful poem, and I would suggest, we probably have it in a book back here, I'm not sure, but it's a poem by Yoganandaji called God, God, God. And it takes you through the kind of daily thought patterns that you have. See, Yogananda said that we have, in a typical day, about 1,000 thoughts. That's about 1 thought per minute of active time. And so, a thought might be, oh, I remember this movie, and then you remember the actors in the movie and plot and so on. Well, maybe you think about that for 5 minutes, but then you have another thought, oh, I wonder what I should have for dinner. So you balance all of those out. Said we have about 1,000 thoughts each day. Well, let's say that during meditation will give us an A+ on this particular meditation. Most of us don't get A+. We get, most of us, when we sit to meditate, our minds are scattered all over. But we're going to have an A+ for this meditation. And our mind is completely concentrated on God or on one of His aspects during the entire meditation. And that lasts for an hour. And then we come and we still have all the rest of the day. And so let's say that we have still 900 thoughts that we're going to have during the rest of that day. How many of those thoughts are going to include anything about God? Anything about your higher aspirations? Anything about the presence of God? Anything about the fact that everything you see is nothing but an extension of God, of Divine Mother, everywhere? How many of those 900 thoughts are going to approach your spiritual realization? And so one of the things that we need to do is we need to start moving our mental milieu more and more to include God. And so this beautiful poem that I was talking about starts out, from the depths of slumber as I ascend the spiral staircase of wakefulness, I will whisper, God, God, God. So the time that you wake up in the morning, Davy and I, have a picture of Master on the wall at the foot of the bed. So when we awake, the first thing that we see is Master. And we try to train ourselves. Having a picture there doesn't mean that you connect with the picture. But we try to train ourselves to, when we wake up, say, good morning, Master. What a beautiful day. How are you today? Or, just make that connection. So from the depths of slumber, as we ascend the spiral staircase of wakefulness, I'll whisper, God, God, God. Then the next common activity, we go and we take food. Thou art the food, and when I break my fast of nightly separation from Thee, I will mentally say, God, God, God. So he's beginning to teach us that each of the activities that we go through during the day can be infused if our minds will remember. It's really just a question of training our minds to remember. Remember that God is in the food. God is in the people sitting at the table with us. God is everywhere. God, God, God. The next stanza, no matter where I go, the spotlight of my mind will ever keep turning on Thee. And in the battle din of activity, my silent war cry will be God, God, God. And so we're going off to work. We're going off to traffic. We're going off to the battle din of activity. It's a beautiful image. So whatever's rushing in, the spotlight of my mind will ever keep turning on Thee. Keep turning our thoughts back to God. I know some people who have a watch that has a timer on it, and so they set it so that every hour the timer beeps, and then they stop and they just meditate for 30 seconds or something like that. Others, every time they see a picture of the divine, they don't just pass it, they actually connect and think of God. As you drive through the streets, you will pass temple after temple after temple. How many times do you stop and think of God who is represented in that temple? The great Master Ramakrishna told one of his disciples, Master Mahashaya, that every time he came to a body of water, that he should sit and meditate for a little while and remember God. So find a way to keep turning your mind back to God. God, in the battle dim of activity, my silent war cry will be God, God, God. That we think, oh, well, I'm busy. I don't have time for this spirituality nonsense. I've got to get my work done. I've got to get ahead. You know, if you do that, you will work more efficiently at a higher level of consciousness. The secret of success is also to keep turning your mind to higher consciousness. That will lead you to better harmony, to better creativity, to better efficiency. It will help you in your work, not take you away from that. But you don't constantly try to hold it. You know, if you're doing computer programming, as an example, you don't try to think of an image of Krishna or God or Babaji or Master. While you're programming, you can't split your mind that way. But Ramakrishna had a beautiful way of describing it. He said, you should be like the mother cow who goes about eating the grass, but always knows where her calf is. And so even while you're concentrated on your work, the back part of your mind can be connected to God, God, God. Then the next stanza is also extremely helpful. When storms of trials shriek, and when worries howl at me, how many times during the day are we going to have some worry, some storm of worry that's shrieking at us, and worries that howl? I will drown their noises loudly chanting God, God, God. So when you're worried, when you feel anxiety, when you feel you don't know what to do, when you feel just worries and difficulties coming to you, you can't get out of them just thinking, and worrying. Put your mind, in fact, bring it to the point between the eyebrows and hold it there, and hold an image of God. God, God, God. At that point, hold an image of Master, whatever. And at that point, you will find that the worries just begin to dissipate. And then there's one more stanza. There are several more stanzas, but one more that I want to quote because this too is extremely important. The next stanza after the trials and the worries shrieking and howling is, when my mind weaves dreams with threads of memories, on that magic cloth will I emboss God, God, God. What this is talking about is our daydreams, our fantasies, our thoughts. You'll be sitting and you'll be thinking, and if you can catch your mind and understand what you're thinking about, what you're fantasizing about, is it getting more money? Is it getting a big house? Is it getting a fancy car? Is day after day after day when you begin to weave dreams with threads of memories, is that where your memories and your thoughts are? If it is, Yogananda said, what is your real prayer? Your real prayer are those things that go on in your mind and you say, oh, I wish I had that. I wish I had this. I wish I was that. I wish. All those little wishes, those are your real prayers. And so let's say that we have 1,000 prayers a day. How many of those prayers are for God or for our enlightenment? And how many are for wealth or fame or beauty or some power struggle that you're facing at work, whatever it is? So we need to work on turning the threads of memories of our fantasies to God, God, God. So maybe instead of thinking about somehow getting a wonderful, huge house, and then you just think of all the nice things that are in that house, you don't think of all the mortgage payments and the cleaning and the staff problems and the plumbing breaking down. And you don't think of any of that. You just think about all the good things. But owning a big house is not all that much fun, frankly. As we get older, we begin to want to downsize our houses. We don't want all that responsibility. So at any rate, instead of fantasizing about that, why not fantasize about being with Babaji in a little cave in the Himalayas? So if we can begin to turn the deeper, these are the threads of memories, remember those subconscious patterns? That's where the memories reside. And so these subconscious patterns come up and we begin to weave dreams with them. Well, consciously make the magic thread of the tapestry of those dreams be something about God, God, God. Maybe it's walking with Yogananda. If you want to think about a house, think about where Yogananda's room in that house is going to be and how often he will come and visit and how you're going to fix that up and whatever. Just to turn your mind toward God, God, God. But see, we not only have to meditate, but we also have to integrate together our spiritual yearnings, and we have to turn those 1,000 thoughts that we have every day more and more toward God, God, God. The good part is that our mind becomes habituated quite quickly. And if you will practice this for a little while with intention and with really trying, then it will begin to get a rhythm of its own. And so you can do it by chanting, you can do it by mantra, you can do it by visualizing, you can do it by trying to feel that for those of us who are disciples of Master, that He's with us all the time. I, for instance, like to jog. When I go jogging, I try to think of Yogananda with me while I'm jogging. He doesn't have to run, he gets to float along. So doesn't have to work up a big sweat like I do. He just floats along, but he comes along with me. And I often just have a prayer that includes him in it. So it's mental habit patterns. So work on your meditation to deepen it. That's very important. But then work on your daily life to include more consciousness of God, God, God. And if you integrate those two together, it will begin to clarify your mind until the mind and consciousness and desires become very much purified. And really then the only thing you want is God. And then when you're ready to take that final exam at the end of this life, you won't exit back here with a lot of unfulfilled desires. You'll exit through the spiritual eye because the thrust of your life has been God, 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 and that's where He resides.